A ship worth $250 million is aground and taking on water. You call one of maybe 6 companies on Earth capable of dealing with it. They will have people in the air within hours and they will spend whatever the job requires, but they will not tell you what it costs, because nobody knows yet. For more than a century, the standard contract in marine salvage has contained no price. It can be agreed over the radio in a single sentence, and it binds both sides from that moment. If the salvors save the ship, an arbitrator in London decides afterwards what they are owed, sometimes tens of millions of dollars. If they fail, they are paid nothing at all, however much they have spent trying. That system once lifted a cruise liner twice the weight of the Titanic off a rock shelf in Italy. It took 500 engineers from 24 countries and 2.5 years, and the final bill came to somewhere between $1 and $2 billion. The budget when they started was $300 million. Nobody involved thought that was unusual, and within a few years, the people writing those checks had put a stop to it. The contract is called the Lloyd's Open Form, and it has been in use since the end of the 19th century. It exists because of a problem with time. A master watching water come through his hull has minutes to decide, no reliable picture of what the job ahead involves, and no way to consult the dozens of cargo owners whose goods are sitting in his holds. If a price has to be agreed first, the negotiating happens while the ship goes down, so the form removes the negotiation. There is a box for the name of the ship, a box for the salver, and a statement of the principle the whole thing rests on. No cure, no pay. One signature binds the ship, the cargo, and everything aboard. Everything else is settled later. That principle is harsher than it sounds. A salvage company can charter tugs, fly a team across the world, work a wreck for 3 weeks and lose equipment doing it. And if the ship is not saved, it receives nothing. Not costs, not a day rate, nothing. The entire risk of the operation sits with the people doing the work. In exchange, the upside is unusual. Once the ship is safe, the salver claims an award. And if the two sides cannot agree, an arbitrator in London sets the figure. He weighs how much danger the ship was in, the skill involved, the time taken, the risk the salvors accepted, and above all, the value of what was rescued, hull, cargo, and fuel together. Through the 1990s, those awards averaged around 9.5% of that value. In the following decade, the average rose to nearly 13. In 2009, it reached 20. On a loaded container ship, 20% is an enormous number. There is a strange consequence buried in that arithmetic. The award scales with what was saved, not with what the job took. Refloat an empty bulk carrier off a sandbank and the reward is modest. Do easier work on a box ship stacked with pharmaceuticals and electronics and the same crew can be paid several times more for less effort. That produced a problem nobody intended. Through the 1960s and 70s, the seas filled with aging single-hulled tankers. And those ships were the worst proposition a salver could be offered. Low value in the hull, enormous liability in the cargo, and a serious chance of a spill attaching itself to whoever was standing nearest. So salvers went where the pickings were richer, and the tankers were left to leak. Fixing that took 20 years and 3 attempts. The form was rewritten in 1980 to guarantee salvers something for tanker work. An international convention in 1989, with clause allowing a salver who protects the environment to be paid at agreed day rates even when the property saved is worth almost nothing. A private safety net, 3 decades in the making, written to make sure somebody still turned up for the ships nobody wanted. So the system was old, crude, and strange. It also meant that anywhere in the world, at any hour, a captain in trouble could summon professional help in one radio transmission and settle the invoice afterwards. The question is why anyone would accept a price set by a stranger in London months later. The answer is that the job cannot be priced any other way. A ship afloat weighs nothing. That is not a figure of speech. The water carries every ton of it, which is why one person can pull a moored vessel along a quay by hand. Run that ship aground and the arithmetic inverts. The hull stops being supported by water and starts being supported by the seabed, and the ground underneath is now carrying everything the ocean used to hold. Sand packs around the plating. Silt fills the space beneath. The hull settles into a mold of itself. The instinct is to pull. That is what tugs are for, and it almost never works. The most powerful ocean tugs afloat develop a couple of 100 tons of pull each. And when the Ever Given grounded in the Suez Canal in 2021, it was 400 meters of loaded container ship driven bow first into the bank. A fleet of tugs at full power was nowhere near enough, and generating the force to shift her by brute strength would have risked tearing the hull open. So salvers do not move the ship. They remove whatever is holding it. That means dredging the ground out from underneath, pumping ballast between tanks to change how the weight sits, taking off fuel and cargo to lighten the vessel, and then waiting for the highest tide the month will give you. On the Ever Given, Roughly 30,000 cubic meters of sand and mud were dug out from around the bow. She came free on the 29th of March, 6 days after grounding, with around 12% of world trade queued behind her. Every one of those variables is invisible from shore. Nobody knows how deep the hull is buried, what the seabed is made of, whether the plating has cracked, or how much cargo will have to come off, until a team is standing on the ship. That is the entire reason the contract was written without a number in it. The people signing it genuinely cannot know what they are agreeing to. The insurer's answer was to stop signing open contracts and start buying jobs at a fixed price. The first real test of that came on a rock shelf off the Italian island of Giglio. The Costa Concordia had rolled onto her starboard side in January 2012, 950 feet of cruise liner lying at 66 degrees in shallow water, a few hundred meters from a village. She could not be cut up where she lay, because the wreck sat in protected waters. She could not be dragged off, because she would have broken apart. She had to be stood upright, floated, and towed away in one piece. The job went out to tender. Titan Salvage and the Italian marine contractor Mico Perri won it. And the figure everyone was working to was around $300 million. What they proposed was a technique borrowed from the age of sail. Parbuckling is how you right a barrel lying on its side, hauling on a rope wrapped around it so that it rolls upright rather than sliding. Applied to a cruise ship, it meant building 6 steel platforms on the seabed to catch the hull as it came over, anchoring the wreck to the rock, and pulling on cables with hydraulic jacks until the entire vessel rotated upright without breaking in half. It took 19 hours, and it worked. Then they welded 30 watertight steel boxes along both flanks, pumped them dry so the wreck floated on them like armbands, and towed her to Genoa at walking pace. More than 500 people, from more than 20 countries. 2.5 years. The final bill came in between $1 and $2 billion. Somebody had to pay that bill, and it was not the cruise line. Marine casualties are covered by insurance, split between the hull underwriters who cover the ship itself, and the protection and indemnity clubs who cover everything the ship does to the rest of the world. The Concordia cost them well over $1 billion, and the lesson they drew was not that salvage is expensive. They knew that already. The lesson was that a fixed price had turned out not to be fixed. So they bought harder. More tendering, more day rate contracts, more competition between salvers before anyone left the dock. In the narrow sense, it worked. It drove the price down. You can watch the old system disappear in the numbers. In 1980, 255 ships were saved under Lloyd's open form. Through the 1990s, the average was around 139 a year. Through the 2000s, 102. In 2014, it was 37. In 2016, 42. A contract that once governed most of the world's emergency salvage now covers a few dozen jobs a year. The awards themselves moved the other way. Through the 90s, they averaged around 9.5% of everything rescued. Through the following decade, nearly 13. That looks like salvers gaining ground, and it isn't. The open form survived only where nothing else would do. Straightforward casualties moved onto fixed prices, because those can be quoted. What stayed on the old contract were the jobs too dangerous or too uncertain for anyone to put a number on, which are precisely the jobs where an arbitrator, weighing risk and skill, awards a high percentage. The industry was being squeezed into the worst part of its own market, a larger share of a smaller number of harder jobs. Salvers did not accept this quietly, and the clearest illustration is what happened after the Ever Given came free. The owner's position was that terms had been agreed before the refloating, on a standard fixed-rate wreck contract. If that were true, the payment was capped at the rates in the document. The salver's position was that the wording had never actually been settled, that no contract was ever concluded, and that they had therefore been working as volunteers under salvage law, entitled to a share of everything they saved. The distinction was worth a great deal of money. Lawyers for the owners suggested the salvers were seeking somewhere around $35 million under the contract, and warned that an open salvage claim could run roughly 10 times higher. The Admiralty Court in London ruled in 2023 that no binding contract had been formed. The Court of Appeal upheld it in 2024. That case is the whole conflict in miniature. Two sides spent 3 years and a fortune in legal fees arguing over which century's pricing system applied to a job that had already been completed successfully in 6 days. And while the argument ran, the money went out of the business. Total revenue across the members of the International Salvage Union was $717 million in 2015. By 2024, it was $406 million. In 2025, it was $190, more than half of it gone in a single year. Income from open form cases fell 57%, and income from wreck removal, the Concordia end of the business, fell 77%. The Union is careful to point out that this is not a straightforward story about safer seas. Salvage income is counted when it is received rather than when the ship went aground, so a bad year on paper can reflect settlements from casualties years old. There is a real improvement underneath it though. Reported incidents on larger vessels fell around 16% in a year, and total losses dropped from 51 ships to 31. But fewer casualties is not the same as fewer catastrophes, and it leaves the surviving companies planning around thinner margins, longer gaps between jobs, and no way of knowing when the next one arrives. That leaves a question the industry has been asking itself for a decade without much success in getting anyone else interested. Ships have not stopped getting bigger. The Ever Given is 400 meters long, and she is not exceptional. Dozens of her class are at sea, and more are on order. They pass through canals and straits with very little room on either side, and the industry that handles them when something goes wrong has consolidated down to a handful of global operators. Those companies are not paid to exist. They are paid when something happens. The tugs, the dredgers, the heavy lift barges, the engineers who know how to right a hull without breaking it, all of it has to be kept ready through the years when nothing does, funded out of whatever work arrives in between. That is the part the pricing argument never really addressed. An emergency service can be run efficiently, or it can be run with slack in it, and the slack is the thing being bought. Every round of tendering takes a little more of it out. The insurers wanted to know what things cost, which is a reasonable thing for an insurer to want. The salvers wanted paying for the risk they were carrying, which is a reasonable thing for anyone to want. The result is a business that gets thinner each year, doing work that only matters on the days it is needed. When the Ever Given went aground, she held up around 12% of world trade for 6 days, and the estimates of what that cost run into the billions. She was freed by a team who arrived with 2 chartered tugs and no agreed contract, and who then spent 3 years in court establishing what they were owed. The next one will be larger,